In 1976, a young German girl named Anneliese Michel, who had been suffering from seizures for several years, believed herself to be possessed by demons. After enduring about 67 exorcism rites over a period of 9 months, she succumbed to starvation at the age of 23. The reason that she starved was that she believed that by fasting, she would be rid of her influence of Satan. Her final weight was around 68 pounds. After some time, the courts concluded that Anneliese died because she had been subjected to extensive and severe exorcism rites, rather than continuing the medications that she had been given for epileptic seizures. So, how did this happen? As it often is, it's a bit of nature and it's a bit of nurture. Let's look at the nurture side of things first. How was she brought up? How was Anneliese raised? What social influences might have contributed to this? So there is some evidence that Anneliese's mother, if not as well as the father, were devoted Roman Catholics. And around 1948, Anneliese's mother gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, that is, Martha. Now this brought upon such disgrace that Anneliese's mother was forced to wear a black veil on her wedding day. That is, she was tainted in a way. So when Anneliese was eventually born, in 1952, her mother encouraged her, Anneliese, to atone for the sins of illegitimacy through fervent devotion. Anneliese could make up for the sins of her mother by being particularly devout. When Martha, that is the illegitimate daughter, before Anneliese was 8, she died from complications arising due to a surgery. Anneliese, perhaps at this time, felt even more strongly the pressure to atone for the sins of her mother. So she found herself increasingly surrounded by evidence of sin and was increasingly anxious to be rid of it. So while other children in the 1960s were rebelling and testing the limits of their freedoms, Anneliese found herself sleeping on a bare stone floor to atone for the sins of the drug addicts who slept rough at the local train station. To get an idea of Anneliese's mindset and the pressure that was exerted on her from a very young age. Very religious overtones. So essentially these beliefs were also reinforced by society, right? Anneliese was believed by many of her peers at some time in the future to be possessed by the devil. It wasn't only her who felt that way, it was everybody in her community. So she, her family, and her friends and neighboring Roman Catholic priests acted in accordance with the beliefs that they held. In fact, after this had all occurred, the mother still believed that what Anneliese went through, i.e. the exorcism, was justified. She has been recorded saying, "I know we did the right thing because I saw the sign of Christ in her hands." She was bearing stigmata, that is, the little holes in the hands, and that was a sign from God that we should exorcise the demons. She died to save other lost souls to atone for their sins. So even at this point, after all she went through, or her daughter went through, the mother still believed this. Perhaps if she didn't believe it, the consequences of her false beliefs would kind of destroy her. Possibly. So let's go back a bit and look at the nature side of things. So is there any predisposition or genetic basis for what occurred to Anneliese Michel? Maybe. When she was 16, Anneliese experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. After this, she was diagnosed with depression and she was treated in a psychiatric hospital. By June 1970, Anneliese had had a third seizure at the psychiatric hospital where she was staying. She was then prescribed anticonvulsant drugs for the first time. At this point in time, she described seeing devil faces at various times during the day, and then she was prescribed additional medication, which is used in the treatment of various psychoses, including schizophrenia, disturbed behavior, and delusions. Fast forward a few years, and Anneliese began experiencing depression hallucinations while praying and complained about hearing voices telling her that she was damned and would rot in hell. So at this point in time, she was around 18, 19 and was progressing quite rapidly into quite a deep state of psychosis. By the time she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and had begun to hear additional voices. So despite maintaining a medication, her condition worsened, and the medication, at least in the family's opinion, failed to improve her symptoms. And at this point in time, both Anneliese and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. They've tried the medication for 5 years. It's not working. The only other option would be possession. So from a modern biomedical point of view, we now know that seizures affecting particular cortical regions or cerebral subsystems can give rise to what they call subjective symptoms, right? These are symptoms which are perceived by the affected person only and include hallucinations, illusions, and or delusions. So while rare, there are also recorded instances of psychosis having occurred in people suffering from epilepsy. Some research suggests that about 6 to 10% of people with epilepsy suffer from psychosis with symptoms. And now these symptoms include depression, mania, and delusion, and generally appear within 7 days of the seizure. It's not clear what causes symptoms like hallucinations. Some researchers hypothesize that it might be the body's way of resetting itself after a seizure. And while some drugs are currently being tested, we still don't know much about treating this post-seizure psychosis that can occur in around 10% of people who suffer from epilepsy. So at this point in time, after the family and Anneliese herself became convinced that she was possessed by a demon, they asked the local priests for an exorcism. They were refused twice. The priest declined and recommended the continuation of medical treatment and informed the family that exorcisms required the bishop's permission. So in the Catholic Church, official approval for an exorcism is granted when the subject strictly meets the set criteria. It's not something that they just administer or perform without much consideration. However, one of the first indications of possession, or as the Catholic Church calls it, infestatio, is the dislike for religious objects and supernatural powers. So at this point in time, Anneliese was quite averse to any religious objects, right? So some of these conditions are being met. Apparently, Anneliese told some people that she was unable to enter a Christian shrine, and she said that the soil burned like fire and she simply could not stand it. Gradually, Anneliese's condition got worse. She would perform about 600 genuflections a day. That is essentially bending the knee and, lamenting their sins. And it got so bad that she eventually ruptured her knee ligaments. She crawled under a table, barking like a dog for 2 days. She ate spiders, coal, and bit the head off of dead birds. So, if you're coming from this idea of a strong Roman Catholic background, this could look a little bit like infestatio. So by 1975, and upon the third request for an exorcism, it was granted by the Bishop of Würzburg. Anneliese had refused further medical intervention from the psychiatric hospital she was staying at, and her symptoms, which were being treated for schizophrenia, they should have been responding to the treatment at this point in time. It was at this stage that her exorcism was performed by one Father Arnold Renz and one Pastor Ernst Alt, and this went over a period of 9 months where 1 to 2 4-hour sessions a week were held. According to the priests, they identified several demons, including Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, and Adolf Hitler. However, this did not save Anneliese Michel. And that is essentially the end to a very unfortunate case. So, what's your opinion? Was it possession? Or was it simply a misdiagnosis and a mistreatment of a psychiatric disorder brought upon by severe epileptic seizures. Let me know your thoughts. That's all for today, and thanks for watching.